So I would like to start directly asking you about beauty, because we all have a relationship to beauty. We enjoy beauty, and beauty is something that we revere very much as part of our human existence. But it seems that you as a spiritual teacher have a particular relationship to beauty, that beauty has something to teach us. And as if I understand you even right, you see that beauty is a certain, if I may say, power force that has very much to do with the source of consciousness, with something that can teach us what our human existence is about. Can you tell us what can beauty teach us as humans?
Well, it may be tempting to go into description first and begin to speak about the beauty as if driven by an attempt to qualify it along with all other experiences. But this might take us the wrong path right from the beginning. So I would like to go straight to the very core of where the teaching itself comes from or springs from. Whenever I speak of beauty, I don't speak of what beauty perhaps spoken of most commonly today, or even not so commonly. Beauty here spoken of in terms of love and God. In other words, beauty is another term, in this case in English language as we speak, and then it will be in German language, is not a term that defines here some range of human experiences, but it's spoken, or at least presupposes, the ultimate nature of reality. So in other words, it's not even why beauty is important, but I'm happy to talk about it, of course, why that is. But rather, beauty is always uncovered, unveiled, revealed. Just as if we speak about it in terms of the Godhead, in terms of the self, in terms of the ultimate reality of who we are, it's not something that comes to us. It's not something that a byproduct of certain incredible, let's say, intellectual apprehension, or even if spoken in terms of that more Christian descent of grace, where this suddenly dawns in us. It's the process of removing that what obstructs it, and then it shines forth. So beauty, the way it is spoken here, or the way I speak about beauty, it's all there is. And our job is to render asunder whatever stands on the way of perceiving it. You see, so that's the take that I want to have right at the beginning of discussion, so that it doesn't take us to kind of more of a peripheral way of going around it, if you see what I mean.
What you're saying is quite a strong statement. Beauty is all there is. And one is tempted to kind of say, wait a moment, that's obviously not so obvious, because a lot of things are just very obviously not beautiful. What are you pointing to when you're saying beauty is all there is?
Okay, well, this may be where we need to tread a little gentler. And in order to respond to this, first I would like to maybe speak to what really becomes the leitmotif of life, what becomes the real kind of meaning, what gives meaning to it, is a certain set of shared ideas, a certain consensus that at some point begins to be shared by a group of people. We can go far into the past and see how it may begin to form, but that's not our purpose here. Yet there is always this, some ideas come, right? If there was no idea to go to the moon, then none of that effort to land on the moon and, and just kind of like mark a certain point in the history of, let's say, human civilization. It doesn't matter whether Americans or Russians were there first or who put their flag. The fact is there was an idea in the first place. Likewise, in order to worship gods in ancient Greece, the epitome of that, building the Acropolis somewhere, and in that Acropolis there's a Parthenon, right, which is considered to be the very cradle of Western European civilization, arguably, where all these ideas, the most important refined ideas came that drive our civilization. Whenever we find ourselves exhausted on what and how and why we're here, we always can lean on these ancient Greek ideals, whether we speak of democracy, whether we speak of harmony, whether we speak of, all these many disciplines, whether it's social political structures, or whether this is to do with existential affairs, human development. So there are ideas. Ideas precedes everything. And among all these ideas, if you will, principal ideas. And one of the most principal idea that exists throughout all the cultures is the idea of who we are, what the heck are we doing here, what is our purpose, where we come from, and one way or the other, it takes the inquirer to a place where uncompromising degree of discrimination is required, and then suddenly we have this whole notion of self-realization, this idea of enlightenment, idea of getting to know our essence. So we have many other ideas, right? We just mentioned many ideas how to, let's say, create the most amazing rose, and how to create the most amazingly tasting tomato, or variety of tea, right? And these ideas are important. Some cultures meticulously preserving these refinements, right? Whether this is to do with something just, how to know by the sound of clay that, that clay can be used successfully in ceramic or in something which will become a mold, to cast something out. I'm being a little bit archaic here, but if you're patient with me, I'm building something here. So all these ideas are valid. They're very important. And of course, these ideas result in us sitting and speaking like this through these technological devices that allow us to cut through the limitation of space, at least. And we enjoy this technology. This is also persuasion of set of ideas that gives us this enjoyment, right? Whatever else comes with it is another story. We can also speak about it. But all this still belongs to the ideas. And then there are ideas, or rather one central idea which is pertinent to the very essence of who we are. And in every culture, wherever that culture is, Occident, Orient, we can find the measure of relevance in terms of whether the culture is anchored in something which is truly eternal and not pursuing some ephemeral goals, like, for example, going to Mars and establish some kind of colony there, maybe having tickets back and forth, like some holiday on Mars, right? Also ideas. But maybe these ideas take us away from a very important question of why are we on on this planet Earth in a human form. So for some beings, and I include myself in this category, this idea becomes central at some point. The persuasion of that ultimate truth of who we are and what we are doing here becomes central. So if we establish that, then within these ideas now of self-realization, and then we can count many different terms of how it is defined in a variety of cultures of what stands for that self-realization. But essentially, it's all to do with the matters of spirit, the matters of this, what is then born into the science of discipline known as psychology, science of the psyche, human psyche, because our soul is, if you will, now indecisively in between the patriarchal outlived systems where religious custodians or the custodians of great religions were in charge are no longer in charge. And we are left as a human race right now, I feel, in that kind of a transitory phase, transitory stage. Psychology tries to fulfill that role. And that role is, of course, being also fulfilled by all these various spiritual teachers, mavericks, just downright simple folks who try to speak from their level of realization. Fine. So we've got this picture covered. And yet, when it comes to this loftiest of all aspirations, the domain of spirit is no longer decided by the priestly caste, by the priestly society. It is delegated to a human being. It's delegated to you and me to tend to the affairs of what it means to be human and how to balance this act to be human today in this world. Fine. So we agreed that there is this ideas. So there's this fundamental grand idea of self-realization expressed in terms of enlightenment, right? Whatever other terms there are, we can come up with many, that's not the point. But what I'm trying to say now, and this is where I'm going back to where you have asked me why that is and what's the beauty, how can that be the beauty all there is that because within these ideas, within every culture, there is some, if you will, profoundly hidden germs, like profoundly hidden, even I would say secrets. They're packed somewhere. You have to uncover them. They're not there. One can go and study a lot of things today, and Oriental spirituality has influenced Western thought profoundly, vice versa, of course. This is a mutual process. But we could say that Asia has been influencing the West in the last 150 years in a very profound way. Though socio-economically, we live under the domain of Western cultures, whether we like it or not, Western ideals. But deep within, there is this counterwave, the process of the influencing of these ideas and ideologies that come from the Orient, maybe with also the process of democratization of these countries, which have been subjugated and subjected to colonialism for a long time. But one way or the other, it's a counterwave. And within this, some of these teachings, there is yet another hidden perspective, that self-realization is not the actual ultimate goal. The perspective that I prefer to work with people, the kind of grand umbrella of this teaching, comes from ideas that were formulated beautifully somewhere around 10th century of a common era by the sage known as Abhinavagupta. He was a Kashmiri sage who lived in North India in Kashmir Valley, and whose teaching encapsulated everything that was happening in Indian subcontinent prior to that in its most supreme form. And we need to maybe go just a little bit there, sort of to make it clearer why beauty all there is. According to Abhinavagupta, and by the way, Abhinavagupta didn't just start it from scratch. Maybe it's good to introduce this to our audience, to your audience, that India contained in itself all these, what came encapsulated, what gave boost to culture in such profound way that its resonance is being enjoyed by all of us now. Just like aforementioned Greece could be considered to be the cradle of Western European civilization, where that resonance of these ideas and ideologies still resonate throughout our life, even if we don't care, and if we don't pay attention to it, it still remains to be true. So there are sacred texts that deal meticulously with the subject of human emotion, with the subject of every single minute emotion that came through the work of another sage known as Bharata. He was known to compose one of the most important texts that every singer, dancer, performer, artist in India need to be acquainted if they belong to the classical heritage of Indian art. And that is known as Nitya Shastra. So this work set forth this, if you will, foundational stones, foundational grounds for the formation of theater and everything else. Just like in ancient Greece, if we are to recall the work of a great Friedrich Nietzsche, where in his first published essay on the birth of the Greek tragedy, where he outlined this, right, Apollonian and Dionysian perspectives alongside each other, and giving this most profound critique to the entire Western culture, he also spoke about the importance of the role of the theater in ancient Greece, because theater is the mother of all arts. Now, to summarize it now, because we are in danger of losing kind of the various different threads, and putting it now together. Abhinavagupta came up with formulation of certain ideas which gave, if you will, rehabilitation to the entire Indian spirituality, which prior to that was dominated by the importance of renunciation of the world as we know it, where even the creative process itself was considered to be causal in nature. In other words, if I set to create a beautiful cup, or paint a picture, or compose a verse, or write a sonata, it is not because there's some genius speaking through me, but because it's something karmically playing itself out in terms of what some of the loftiest teachings of Indian spirituality taught for the millennia in terms of the dependence on causality, cause and effect, the famous law of karma. In other words, it's all karmic in nature. So in other words, artists were deprived of the valid ground beneath their feet to plant their inspirations, or rather to have that innate reassurance that there is something to that impulse to render asunder that what otherwise is always under certain kind of film, if you will, certain filter, so as to give access to this what is then spoken in again in Greece to our day as catharsis, that cathartic experience, that what can bring about a certain visceral realignment within by virtue of being exposed to this or that experience. So in other words, the genius of this is that it gave the rehabilitation that every creative act, every creative enterprise is nothing other than direct display of the very purpose of who we are and why we're here. So from that point of view, Joseph Beuys, if he was familiar of the teachings of Abhinavagupta, I'm sure he would have found a lot of confirmation in his own musings about that everyone is an artist. Everyone is an artist. That slogan that he came up with, that artist or creativity is not a privilege of so-and-so, but it's an innate condition of every human being. So in other words, everyone is born here to experience that. Why we don't, that's another story altogether. So this, if you will, a long response to your question on how can beauty be spoken of in terms of all there is, because beauty is spoken here in terms of the revelation of our essential nature.
When you were talking about Joseph Beuys, and when you're talking about the innate experience that is innate to all of us, this aesthetic experience that Joseph Beuys was referring to when he was making this claim, we all are artists, he was referring to something that in facing that we all are artists, there's something shown to us in our human experience that also allows us to relate to life, to society, to ourselves in a very different way. And he found this an important message. It basically was the message of his life. And the way I understand you, and also how you bring in the ancient teachings of tantric India, and what the value of art, of theater, again the same with Greek art of theater, there's something in this innate experience that is showing us something about who we as humans are fundamentally. So it seems that in this aesthetic experience, beauty is more than enjoyment, it's the revelation of something. If that is so, the revelation of what?
Okay, this is very important that we now maybe try to define a little bit, or rather give the greater insight into what beauty as an experience is. Because this is where the commonly held ideas of beauty, especially today, and beauty that is spoken of here is not one and the same. If beauty is spoken of in terms of certain culturally agreed upon aesthetic ideas, even if that is rooted to a large degree into certain, let's say, measurable phenomena, such as, let's say, music, there are certain components that are indispensable, right? That they have, there's rhythm, there's melody. There are certain aspects with which music speaks. There's this, in poetry, there is this cadence. In, let's say, painting, a tremendous place is being, a tremendous role is given to the chromatic resonance, especially if we speak about painting before, let's say, abandoning these ideas of retinal experience, retinal expression, because there are perspectives that painting suffered tremendous blow on the verge of the most interesting development approximately at the beginning of the 20th century, because it's too quickly went into these avant-garde ideas where the findings of artists, of Viennese school, of French school, of, you know, like all these different schools, right, were basically left abandoned because it was not, but this chromatic resonance that I speak of, it's a kind of a very specific tuning, if you will. It's not just a passive way of observing or seeing. It cannot be experienced if there is this passivity in that. Therefore, I remember very well when, as a young artist, being tutored, you know, one of my early teachers would say, as a reminder continuously, it's the way you are able to see it. If you are not able to see it, then it doesn't matter how good you are, how skillful you are. It's about the way of seeing it. So it all boils down to the ability to tune this instrumentality to such degree that it can again, if you will, rip or open that what conceals this. We all enjoy the sunset at the sea. We all enjoy this last ray of light. We all enjoy this, you know, a black crow on a white on a white snow. You know, this certain quality of experience, you know, like walking on the white sand of the beach, you know, like seeing the autumn leaves floating in that dark water. There are certain experiences that we all can say, oh, they're beautiful, that's lovely. But that's not what we're talking about here. This reality is always concealed, opaqued by the mundane nature of how we perceive it. So therefore, first we need to establish what is beauty. And beauty is being able to literally fall into a state of being able to allow that to open oneself to such degree that what is there begins to reveal itself in greater way. And the beauty then here will include all the range of other experiences, all the way to the terrifying experiences, experiences which will strip us bare to the most essential, if you will, relationship with the world, because that will no longer be based on that detached nature of observer, where one simply can sit in one's comfortable chair and enjoy the sunset. I'm talking about experiences which sometimes, occasionally, some of us seek or being granted with or undergo unexpectedly. I'm talking about calamities. I'm talking about display of nature's primal forces, earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, thunder, lightning. All this contains in itself, or rather creates the possibility of immediate experience of that beauty. So you see, what we're trying to touch upon here is the range of degree of subtlety, from minutely subtle way of how one perceives this, let's say, range of mountains at a distance, and how that can be completely transformed into an event for a painter, to the experience of being somewhere in the jungle with the thunder, rain, storm, where it's like heaven crashed down on earth. All these are opportunities and possibilities of experiencing beauty, in other words, our own essential nature, in more direct ways. So it's not just sweetly arranged flowers here or nicely matching curtains in the living room. So in other words, beauty needs to be redefined and given its authenticity. So in other words, it's a process of rehabilitation we're speaking about here. And all those who come to me and attend my retreats or have engaged in any exchanges, correspondence, they know that I never speak about beauty in terms of this sluggish affair of, let's say, well-developed taste, or, you know, it's none of that. None of that.
Let me come back to the question that your tutor, or what your tutor told you, that it's all about, if I may paraphrase you, your capacity to see. Because when you described that, and then you described all the different forms of beauty that we usually cherish, and you were making the point, this is not what I'm talking about. It seems that you are making the point that beauty is something that has a lot to do with our capacity to see reality in a different way. And when you're talking about thunder, talking about jungle, and that it can open up something that is of a different kind, it seems that when you're pointing to this beauty, you're pointing not to aesthetics as we understand it, you're pointing to something that is a revelation. But at the same time, if I understand you right, you say the revelation is in beauty, or beauty is the revelation, and it shows us something about the truth of being, the truth of who we are. First, do I understand you right? And second, what is this different way of seeing, or ask the same question the other way around, what is this veil that prevents us from this kind of seeing that you're talking about?
No, absolutely. First, yes, the experience of beauty, or being in the presence of beauty, and it's always one's own beauty, because it's a self-revelation. In other words, it's spoken in terms of that spiritual experience. Just as at the beginning, I wanted to have this beauty is another term for God. It's another term for the absolute. It's another term for the self, the ultimate reality. Beauty here is awareness, which recognizes itself. So it's fundamentally the experience which is either available to those who undergone through profound transformation of consciousness, and they abide in that. If I were to speak to a different audience, let's say those who are closer to these ideas that come with Sufi teachings, then that beauty here is known as the state of wonder. Sufism speaks a lot about that wonder, that experiencing reality not as a set of preconceived notions and ideas, but experiencing reality as this wonder, because reality doesn't exist, as, let's say, continuation of our experience based on what we have experienced prior to that, which gives us this projected perspective. This is the veil. This is the Maya, if you will. Experience, by very virtue of that term, is always giving birth to the reality which we behold. And that is, if you will, the ultimate job, which comes as that cherry on a cake of self-realization. So the Sufis, they speak about it in remaining in a state of perpetual wonder, because reality is being reborn, not because or rather, the world out there does not exist outside of our perception. This is a quantum interdependence we speak of here. So the reality is not something that, okay, there is this pond, there is this mountain, there is this tree, there is this landscape, there is this car, there is this bus, there is this person, there is that person. I move between all these objects, I know them, I'm familiar with them. This is the illusion, this is the veil. When that veil is rendered asunder, then reality begins to be experienced for what it is. And what is being experienced is nothing short of that wonder. Therefore, it is spoken of in terms of that wonder of experiencing this as that renewal, that great Kashmiri saint and, greatly venerated being, Lala of Kashmir, female saint. She is known for saying that the soul, like a moon, is always new and now. So in other words, it's this familiarity, this kind of, I know it because I've seen it so many times, is on the account of something is not fully there. And just like if we give ourselves a little well, sort of to make it maybe more accessible, and we'll give it an example. If we are to teach art, if we are to teach someone now this art of self-expression in whatever domain, one of the prerequisites would be here is to being ready, prepared to sacrifice that what one knows perpetually. In doing so, there is this potentiality begin to be enlivened, where one can tap into seeing in a different way. But with that being said, it's like, if you will, the chicken and egg story, or the catch-22, because this is where the philosophy, or if you will, of yoga comes into, and very helpful, is that our experience is predetermined to the degree of how much consciousness is available anyway. So this is where it then no longer in the domain of wishful thinking. So in other words, this is where every artist has no choice but to become a knower of his or herself, because there's no other way. Every other way would be, if you will, an attempt at tiptoeing, an attempt to come and sneak or leapfrog or bypass, because the transformation of consciousness brings this about, this possibility, known of and spoken of very often as refinement of perception. That refinement of perception is what gives this, if you will, it simply becomes one's own nature. It becomes one's own nature, and then it can be refined to a greater degree. But without the transformation in consciousness, without this, if you will, visceral processes, then artist only has, or anyone in this case, anyone is only left with one's own devices. And what are these devices? These devices are windows of perception lit by consciousness. So in other words, it all boils down to how much consciousness is available in the first place, and how then the refinement took place. And we know that some individuals, yeah.
But isn't it the case that beauty, understood in the right way, is an opening to consciousness? I'm still with what you said about the Sufi understanding of beauty, and when you talked about the awe and wonder, because there is a kind of beauty where beauty is kind of not really penetrating us. It's not kind of provoking us, but there is a kind of beauty understood or experienced in a way that is deeply provoking us and leaving us unsettled. And it seems that this kind of beauty does something as beauty to us that transforms consciousness. If I remember right, you said at some point that beauty is maybe the most direct path. I don't know if you said to truth or to the absolute, but is this this experience of beauty understood in the right way, that if I let beauty touch me, that basically it doesn't leave me untouched. It does something to me that goes beyond what I usually can hold with my usual consciousness.
I think we will do injustice if we don't mention something here, since we already began introducing this, and we've introduced the importance of ideas and ideologies and the role of philosophy. Because it might be helpful to bring this very important concept shared by all schools of Indian philosophy, and not just, it's kind of, if you will, in terms of metaphysical understanding of reality, shared by a lot of Oriental thought. This will, knowledge, and action, in Sanskrit, Ikcha, Jnana, Kriya, will, knowledge, and action. We can find that direct allusions to that in Western European philosophies. We can find direct allusions to that in Western European thought and metaphysics. You can find that in the aforementioned existentialists like Nietzsche. You can find this in earlier philosophers like Immanuel Kant, and all the way back to the classical Greece and early Greek philosophers. Will, knowledge, and action. And then there is this Hindu concept, again, with the expansion of yoga and the popularity of yoga, Sat Chit Ananda, right? Sat Chit Ananda is spoken by so many people today, so many people, so many yoga journals, it's like a popularized already term since probably the 60s. Sat Chit Ananda. Sat stands for being, absolute, unfathomable being. Chit for consciousness. It's a root, by the way, of many other terms, but Chit is Sanskrit term for consciousness. And Ananda is bliss, is rapture, is this ecstasy, right? It's Ananda, that's what it stands for. So there is a direct correlation, of course, with this will, knowledge, and action, and Satchitananda as being, consciousness, bliss. So this is the substratum of all creation. This is the substratum of all experiencing. This is how Indian philosophy speaks about it. That every experience beyond any attributes out of which this experience may be made, is made out of these components, out of being, consciousness, bliss. Every experience, in essence, is taking place nowhere outside of being. And not only that, there is consciousness. One is conscious of that experience. And that act of being, that act of being conscious, brings tremendous rapture, that Ananda element. Being is incomprehensible, inaccessible. In other words, being would be obscure if not for the quality of Chit, quality of consciousness, which allows the possibility of being comprehended. So that's what the relationship between these two. But all this, being and consciousness, remain speculative, if you will, and accessible only by those who, let's say, give their life to this. Where is this Ananda, this bliss, is the most accessible aspect of the entire substratum of every experience that is available to every single human being, irrespective of the state of their consciousness. And that is, if you will, the philosophical implications of why the path of beauty, or the beauty, is so important. Because Ananda is another term for beauty. Beauty here, or ananda rather, is the manifestation of beauty which is available to direct experience, even down to the sensory level of perception. So in other words, this is a kind of a response to what you were reiterating, and I agreed with that, yes. But to take us further, and if you will, to give us that a greater insight into why beauty has been considered to be this almost extraordinary way of relating to one's divine essence or to one's essence, is because it doesn't require this access to what is inaccessible. Being is inaccessible. Consciousness, one needs to really dedicate one's own life to be able to be conscious in all situations, to be conscious in all conditionings. It makes a certain very disciplined being. Another topic. But beauty is something which is available to absolutely everyone. And beauty here again as this revelatory experience that can shake us, experience that can be, it also has the quality of that extreme refinement. After all, the gradation between inhaling this, beautiful scent that sends this kind of indescribable vibrations, gives this direct, palpable perception of what in India is known as ananda. Let's see, you smell a rose, jasmine, lotus, anything. Proliferation of the perfume industry is based on that. Just think about it. The addiction to good scent is something which is extremely important affair. We're driven by it. But spoken from this perspective, it's nothing other than touching that beauty, however superficially, however for a short moment in time. So in other words, this ananda, this bliss, this rapture, this ecstasy is indispensable, or another side of beauty, which doesn't require any preparation and available to all, down to the level of the enjoyment that comes through senses. This is where, if you will, Tantra is unapologetically different among spiritual philosophies and methodologies, because it does not negate, it sees them as portals. Many other spiritual traditions cast out a very different spiritual path, where senses is something one needs to overcome, battle with, transcend, go beyond. In Tantra, they are seen as doorways of perception. So this, if you will, one can begin to make one's own insights, because it's very important to have one's own insight into what we speak about now, as how the beauty sits here in terms of why it is considered to be as a supreme way of relating to one's own self.